There is a reason we hesitate to pull over on a pitch-black stretch of road. We tell ourselves it's just an empty forest, but ancient folklore operates on a different premise. The wild is never truly empty. It is already occupied. Take a look at this view of Port Blair, located in the Andaman Islands. In May of 2019, this tropical region was sweltering. This photograph captures the observance of Ramadan. During this month, after a long day of fasting in the oppressive heat, a young man named Salman and his friends finished their night prayers and headed out for a late-night motorbike ride to cool off. The group rode about 40 kilometers outside the city limits to a place called Kodi Agat. Out here, the streetlights vanish, and the road cuts directly through a dense, silent forest. Without realizing it, they had driven past the boundaries of human law, crossing directly into an ancient, unregulated wilderness. Around 2 a.m., Salman asked his friends to pull over so he could relieve himself. He stepped off the pavement and walked a few paces into the dark tree line. As he stood there in the dark, a sudden blast of ice-cold wind hit his body. In the humid, stagnant heat of a tropical May night, a freezing current of air is a physical impossibility. As you can see in this rendering of the jungle canopy, the foliage around him remained completely paralyzed. Not a single leaf fluttered. The freezing wind was touching only him. A deep instinctual panic set in. His hair stood on end. He immediately cut himself short and sprinted back to the motorcycles, his face pale with dread. He had unknowingly crossed an invisible territorial line. The environment itself was reacting, violently registering his disrespect. As the bike sped away, Salman glanced back at the trees. Standing exactly where he had just been was a shadowy figure 8 feet tall, gripping a long, glowing object that looked like a sword. He screamed at his friend to accelerate, but when he looked over his shoulder seconds later, the massive entity was no longer in the trees. It was standing directly in the middle of the road behind them. The figure eventually stopped its pursuit, but only because the physical chase was over. What Salman was entering is a documented pattern of supernatural takeover, an anatomy of possession moving through the initial breach into incubation, and finally, a total takeover. As the process moves into the incubation phase, symptoms shift from external dread to internal collapse. Minutes after returning to the safety of his home, Salman was struck by a paralyzing fever. The haunting had successfully breached his physical defenses. What began as an external pursuit on an empty highway was now an active biological siege inside his own body. His family assumed he just needed rest. Salman closed his eyes, believing he slept briefly. When he finally woke, his family stared at him in horror. He had been completely unresponsive in his bed for 2 full days. Then, the intense psychological manipulation of the host began. This image shows the dense mangroves framing the waters around the islands. Every night, Salman developed a hypnotic, overwhelming urge to walk straight into that dark ocean. The situation rapidly deteriorated into violence. His behavior shifted without warning. Exhibiting terrifying physical strength, he destroyed the kitchen, launching heavy metal plates and steel cups across the room as his family tried to restrain him. The chaos abruptly stopped. Salman sat on the floor, dropped his head forward, and spoke. But the voice echoing through the room was deep, guttural, and entirely unfamiliar. It calmly announced Salman had 2 days left to live, and then he would be taken. The original human host was entirely suppressed. The entity wasn't chasing Salman. It used his mouth to negotiate directly with his family. Desperate, the family brought in a local Maulvi, an Islamic religious scholar, who initiated a direct interrogation with the possessed young man. Under questioning, the entity revealed its identity. It was a jinn, and it was furious because Salman had desecrated its home by urinating on its specific territory in the woods. The entity's response followed a rigid supernatural legal code. It viewed Salman's presence as a formal violation of its territory and demanded justice for the disrespect. In the folklore of the wild, ignorance is not a valid defense. Your intention does not matter. The only thing that registers is the physical act of trespassing on their unseen borders. To release his hold on the boy, the jinn demanded a strict settlement. The ransom was heavy, 30 kilograms of raw meat and the severed heads of chickens. Salman was too weak to travel. Instead, his father gathered the gruesome offering, drove 40 kilometers back out to Kodia Ghat, and left it at the exact base of the tree where the breach occurred, finally closing the loop. This incident highlights an ancient protocol observed by generations of people living near remote places. If you must step off the path and enter an unknown patch of wilderness, you have to announce your presence. Clap your hands 3 times, or quietly speak into the dark and ask for permission to use the space. Because we are only temporary guests in the wild, and you never truly know whose territory you are standing on.